One of the CSS features I like is the opacity style rule. Now, once you start getting into jQuery and working with some of the effects that jQuery methods have, they use opacity to help create the fade in, fade out options that we have, and it makes a really nice feature. Now, there's places where you can actually use it in your website. And again, remember when we work with opacity, we're making something transparent. And so we're basically giving it, we're taking the object and we can actually see through it. And so there's some features where you can actually utilize that, and that's what I like about opacity. Now, it might not work for everything, especially when you work with websites, but it's something to take a look at and see how you could use it. So one area that I could use it for is I have this main graphic right here on this page, and then I have some text layered on top. Now, I want that text to stand out, but because it has a busy background behind it, it sometimes can get lost within the graphic itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and create a fill for the box that we have here and then change its opacity so I can still see part of the background show through, but I can at least focus in on my text on that part. So if I take a look at my code right now, I will see that my join now is in a div tag called sub55. The div tags can be named anything you want. I'm using it to help me know that I'm working with subheadings on that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually apply styles that is controlled to the div tag, so it's going to fill it up with a color and then change its opacity. Now, the opacity, you can go in when you work with opacity, you can set the transparency level of any element. One being non-transparent, so when we start putting values in, we can say 0.5, and that's going to be 50% see-through. 0 would be completely transparent on that. So you'll see this example once we go in and start working with the code. So we have to basically determine the value for that. To actually see this and see how opacity works, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a background color to my sub 55 section. Okay, so let me go ahead and save this in my style sheet, and let's view this back in our browser. So you can see the background color is being added to the div tag, and it's just a solid green, kind of match the color scheme that we're going with. So now what I want to do is I want to make it transparent. So what I'll do here is let's go back to my code, and I'm just simply going to type in the keyword opacity, that's the rule, and then I got to follow it by the value, and I'm going to do 0.5. 0.5. So that's going to make it 50% transparent so you can see through it. Okay, I'm going to reload here, and as you can see here, you can see the part of the grass showing through, part of the scenery showing through. Now, as you look at this, what's the side effect of this? Well, it makes everything in your div tag semi-transparent, not just the background. So it's also going in and making the text transparent. Well, that might be a good feature for certain things, but I want the text to stand out. So, in this regards, this might not be the best choice to work with. So what we did here is we went in and we used opacity and we said 0.5 and went and changed the transparency of all the contents inside the div tag. Now we have another aspect out there, style rule that we can use instead, and we can actually control the opacity by using the RGBA style. The RGBA style. So up here when we set up the background color, I used a hexadecimal value. Okay, so now I'm going to use the RGBA style rule. So it's very similar to hexadecimal, except that we're breaking it down into red, green, and blue values. And the A stands for alpha, so you can actually control the opacity of the background color. So I don't need the opacity 0.5 anymore. And I'm going to adjust the background color to use the RGBA color model instead of hexadecimal. Now remember, RGBA or RGB color model and hexadecimal are the best ways to go when you work with colors. But what I like about RGBA is that it gives the chance to change the alpha controls, the opacity aspect of your background. Now you do have to go in and figure out which values of red, green, and blue equal the same color as your hexadecimal if you're using hexadecimal. That's where Photoshop comes in play. Photoshop, you type in your hexadecimal in the color field, you can actually then look at what the RGB values are. Now, notice how I separate these values in parentheses by a comma. The first one stands for red, green, blue, and then I'm going to have the last one, which is our alpha control, which is our opacity. So that's why we don't need the opacity style down here. It's going to be placed right here in the background. Now, let's take a look, and we'll reload. And notice the background changes opacity, but the content, the text stays very vibrant, or white in this case, and so it stands out. So when you start working with opacity, you want to take a look at how your content is. And if you don't want your text to change opacity, then you definitely want to switch to the RGBA color model because it gives you a little more design look or design feel, and it helps enhance your overall design on that part.